My name is Thomas. I'm 42 years old, and for the last 10 years, I've worked as a structural engineer in Jackson. Before that, I did 6 years in the Marine Corps, 2 tours overseas. I'm not given to flights of fancy. I believe in physics, in load-bearing capacities, in things you can measure and quantify. I mention this because the story I'm about to tell you will test the limits of what you think is measurable, what you think is real. It's the reason I sold my grandfather's farm, the reason I can't sleep without a light on, and the reason I will never again set foot in a forest after the sun goes down. My grandfather, William, passed away in the late fall. He was 89, lived a full life, and died in his sleep right there in the farmhouse he was born in. The farm wasn't much of a working farm anymore. He'd long since sold off most of the cattle and leased the big fields to a neighboring soy farmer. What was left was the old house, a big red barn in need of a new roof, and about 80 acres of dense Mississippi woods, thick with pine, oak, and tangled kudzu. It was located deep in the county, at the end of a winding gravel road that turned to mud in the rain. It was my favorite place on earth. After the funeral, I was tasked with clearing out the place. My mother couldn't bear to do it. So, I took a 2-week leave from work, packed up my old blue-tick coonhound, Duke, and drove down from the city. Duke was getting on in years, a little gray around the muzzle, but his nose was as good as ever. I figured the country air would do him good, and I'd have the company. The plan was simple. Sort through a lifetime of my grandfather's things, make a pile for charity, a pile for family keepsakes, and a pile for the dump. It was supposed to be a quiet, somber task. A way to say a final goodbye to the man who taught me how to hunt, how to fish, and how to tell which way the wind was blowing by the feel of it on your cheek. The first few days were exactly that. Peaceful. The air was crisp with the coming winter, and the woods were a riot of rust and gold. I spent the mornings sorting through boxes in the dusty attic, memories in every one. Old photographs, his service medals from Korea, fishing lures he'd carved by hand. In the afternoons, Duke and I would walk the property lines, checking the fences, just like I used to do with Grandpa. The silence was immense, broken only by the cawing of crows or the rustle of a squirrel in the dry leaves. Duke would trot ahead, nose to the ground, his tail wagging a steady, happy rhythm. It felt normal. It felt safe. The first wrong thing happened on the 4th day. We were on the western edge of the property, where the land slopes down into a thick, swampy creek bottom. It was an area I knew well. Grandpa and I had set deer stands there for years. Duke, who was about 30 yards ahead of me, suddenly stopped dead. The fur on his back went up, and he let out a low, guttural growl I hadn't heard from him in years. It wasn't his, "I see a raccoon" bark. It was deeper, more serious. I came up alongside him, my hand instinctively going to his back to calm him. That's when I smelled it. It was the coppery, gut-wrenching smell of a fresh kill, but it was overwhelming, far stronger than it should have been. I pushed through a thicket of sawbriars and saw it. A doe, or what was left of one. It had been torn apart. I'm not talking about a clean kill from a hunter or even the work of coyotes. This was different. This was violent, frenzied destruction. The animal's ribcage was snapped open like a wishbone, and its internal organs were strewn across the leaf litter. Large chunks of meat had been ripped from the haunches. But the strangest thing was the way the neck was broken. It was twisted at an impossible angle, the head nearly torn from the spine. I've seen what coyotes do. They're opportunistic. They go for the soft parts, the belly. I've seen what a black bear can do. They're powerful, but they're messy in a different way. This was something else. It looked like the deer had been picked up by an immense force and simply broken. I knelt, ignoring the smell, and looked at the ground. The soft earth around the carcass was a mess of tracks, but they weren't right. There were some definite coyote tracks, small and neat, scavengers that had come after the fact. But there were other prints, larger ones, much larger. They were deep and oblong, almost like a bear's, but the stride was wrong. They were too far apart for a four-legged animal, and there was a strange, elongated shape to the heel. It looked bipedal. I stood up, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I tried to rationalize it. A huge black bear, I told myself. A really big one, maybe walking on its hind legs for a few steps to get a better vantage point. It was plausible, barely. But the tracks didn't show any sign of it dropping back to all fours. And the damage to the deer, it felt personal. It felt angry. Duke was still growling, his eyes fixed on the dark wall of trees beyond the creek. He wouldn't go near the carcass. That was my first clue. A hound that wouldn't investigate a fresh kill was a hound that was terrified. "Come on, boy," I said, my voice a little tight. "Let's go." I turned and walked away, not looking back. Duke stayed so close to my leg he was practically tripping me. The walk back to the farmhouse was different. The woods didn't feel peaceful anymore. They felt watchful. The silence wasn't calm. It was heavy, expectant. Every snap of a twig made me jump. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see a massive black bear trailing us. But there was nothing. Just the trees, standing like silent, indifferent witnesses. That night, I made sure the doors were locked, something I never did at the farm. Grandpa always said the only thing you needed to lock your door against was the wind. I sat in his old armchair, a glass of bourbon in my hand, with the 12-gauge shotgun he kept behind the pantry door, leaning against the wall next to me. I told myself it was for a bear, but I knew, deep down, that I wasn't worried about a bear. I was worried about the tracks that looked like something walking on two legs. Duke refused to sleep in his bed by the hearth. Instead, he lay pressed against the front door, a low, continuous rumble in his chest. Every so often, he'd lift his head, his ears perked, and stare intently at the door, as if he could see through the thick oak. I didn't get much sleep. I kept replaying the image of that deer in my head, the sheer, brutal force that it would have taken. I tried to reason with myself, to break it down with logic. Maybe a poacher had hit it with his truck, and the impact had broken its neck like that. Then the coyotes found it. But what about the tracks? A man in big boots? It didn't fit. None of it fit. The next day, the unease settled in for good. I tried to go about the business of cleaning, but I couldn't focus. I kept finding myself at the windows, scanning the tree line that bordered the back pasture. It was about 100 yards from the house. A solid wall of deep green and brown. It looked the same as it always had, but now it felt like a curtain, a veil hiding something that was watching me. That afternoon, the cicadas stopped. It's a sound you get so used to in the South, that constant, high-pitched thrumming, that you only notice it when it's gone. One moment, the air was full of their buzzing chorus. The next, absolute silence. Not a bird chirped, not a squirrel chattered. The entire forest just held its breath.
Duke, who had been dozing on the porch, shot to his feet, a volley of sharp, frantic barks erupting from his chest. He ran to the edge of the porch, hackles raised, barking furiously at the silent tree line. I came out and stood beside him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What is it, boy? What do you see?" But there was nothing, just the trees. The silence stretched for a full 5 minutes, an oppressive, unnatural void of sound. Then, as suddenly as it stopped, the noise started again. The cicadas revved up, the birds started singing, and the world sounded normal once more. Duke, however, kept staring, whining low in his throat. The rest of the day, he wouldn't leave my side. That night, the real escalation began. I was washing dishes after a late dinner when I heard it. A scrape. A long, dragging scrape against the wooden siding on the back of the house. It was loud and clear. It sounded like someone dragging a garden rake along the boards. I froze, suds dripping from my hands.
Duke went ballistic, launching himself at the back door, barking and snarling with a ferocity that startled me. I grabbed the shotgun and a heavy flashlight, my military training kicking in, pushing a fear down and replacing it with a cold, focused readiness. "Easy, boy," I whispered, my hand on his neck. I moved to the back window and peered out. The porch light illuminated a wide circle of the yard, but the corner of the house where the sound had come from was in shadow. I couldn't see anything. I stood there for a long time, listening. There was nothing but the sound of my own breathing and Duke's low growls. Finally, I decided I had to look. I couldn't just stay in here, waiting. I chambered around into the shotgun, the shuck-shuck sound unnaturally loud in the quiet kitchen. I took a deep breath, unlocked the back door, and swung it open, sweeping the yard with the beam of the flashlight. Nothing. The yard was empty. The tree line was a black wall in the distance, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. I walked cautiously off the porch, shotgun at the ready, and went to the corner of the house. I shone the light on the wall, and my blood ran cold. There were 4 deep, parallel gouges in the wood siding. They started about 7 feet off the ground and ran downwards for about 2 feet. They were deep, splintering the thick cypress boards. It looked like an animal had clawed it, but no bear I'd ever seen could reach that high standing flat-footed. And the marks weren't wide and clumsy like a bear's claws would be. They were narrower, almost precise, like something had deliberately tested the strength of the wall. I backed away slowly, my flashlight beam trembling. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't my imagination. Something was out there. Something big, strong, and intelligent enough to be curious about the house. I hurried back inside, bolted the door, and checked every lock on every window. I spent the rest of the night in that armchair, shotgun across my lap, with Duke at my feet, both of us staring at the windows, waiting for the dawn. The next 24 hours were a blur of mounting dread. I didn't leave the house. I didn't even go on the porch. I just watched and listened. In the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by a sound that would become the soundtrack to my nightmares. It was a howl. But it wasn't the yipping howl of a coyote or the deep, mournful sound of a wolf. It was something in between, a long, guttural cry that seemed to tear itself from a massive throat. It was filled with a chilling, predatory intelligence. It rose in pitch until it was almost a scream, then cut off abruptly. It came from the woods, but it sounded too close. Far too close. Duke whimpered and tried to crawl under my chair. Then came the partial reveal. It was just before dusk on the 6th day. A storm was rolling in, the sky a bruised purple gray. I was standing at the kitchen window, looking out over the back pasture. The wind was picking up, making the tall pines sway and groan. I was about to turn away when a flicker of movement at the edge of the woods caught my eye. I squinted, trying to make it out in the fading light. A deer, I thought, but it was too tall. It stepped from behind a massive oak tree, and for a split second, I saw it in silhouette against the darkening sky. It was on 2 legs. It was huge, probably 7.5, maybe 8 feet tall, with a massive top-heavy build. The shoulders were impossibly broad, tapering down to a narrow waist. The arms were long, too long for the body, hanging down almost to its knees. But the head was the thing that broke my brain. It was long and snouted, with pointed ears silhouetted against the sky. It was the head of a wolf or a huge dog perched atop a monstrous man-like body. It stood there for only a second, its head turning as if to survey the farmhouse. Then it took one fluid, unnaturally quick step back and was gone, swallowed by the shadows of the forest. I stood there, frozen, my mind refusing to process what my eyes had just seen. Dogman. The word sprang into my head from some forgotten corner of the internet, some late-night show I'd scoffed at. A myth, a campfire story. But I had just seen it. It was real. And it was here. The storm broke then, the sky opening up in a torrential downpour. The wind howled, rattling the old window panes. A branch cracked somewhere outside, sounding like a gunshot. A moment later, the lights flickered, buzzed, and died. The house was plunged into absolute darkness and silence, save for the roar of the storm. It had taken out the power line. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that it hadn't been the storm. It had been deliberate. It had isolated me. That's when the real confrontation began. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the switch. The beam cut a shaky path through the darkness. I had to secure the house. My mind raced, running through a tactical checklist. Doors, windows, weak points. The house was old. The windows were single pane. The back door had a simple bolt lock. I was in a wooden box, and something was outside that wanted in. Duke was at my heels, a constant low growl vibrating through the floorboards. I moved through the house, checking every window, pulling the old, heavy curtains shut. It wouldn't stop anything, but at least I wouldn't have to see it looking in. As I reached the living room, I heard a loud thump against the front wall, powerful enough to shake the picture frames. Duke erupted into a frenzy of barking. Another thump, this time on the side of the house. It was circling, testing the perimeter. I backed into the center of the living room, shotgun raised, trying to listen over the storm in my own ragged breathing. Where would it try to get in? The front door was solid oak. The back door was weaker. The windows were the most vulnerable. A loud crash from the kitchen confirmed it. Glass shattered. It had broken the kitchen window. "Stay, Duke," I commanded, my voice cracking. I crept towards the kitchen doorway, my back against the wall. The wind and rain were pouring in through the broken window. I could hear something moving in the kitchen, a heavy, wet, shuffling sound. And sniffing. Loud, deliberate sniffs, like a giant animal tasting the air. It was trying to pinpoint my location. I held my breath, listening. The shuffling stopped. Silence. Then a new sound. A metallic click. The doorknob on the door between the kitchen and the living room was turning. Slowly. Back and forth. It was trying the handle. My mind reeled. It wasn't just a brute beast. It was intelligent. It understood how a door worked. It was problem-solving. The knob rattled violently. The door shook in its frame. The old wood groaned. It was going to break it down. I leveled the shotgun at the center of the door and braced myself. The rattling stopped. I waited, my muscles screaming with tension. Then, a tremendous crack echoed from the other side of the house. It had changed tactics. It had used the noise at the kitchen door as a feint. I spun around and ran towards the source of the sound, the large picture window in the living room. I was too late. One of the main panes of glass was gone, shattered outwards. Standing in the gaping hole, framed by the raging storm, was the creature. The flashlight beam hit it full in the chest, and the sight will be burned into my memory until the day I die. It was worse up close. It had to duck to fit through the window frame. Its body was covered in coarse, matted fur the color of wet river mud. The muscles in its shoulders and chest were massive, bunched and powerful beneath the hide. Its arms were long and sinewy, ending in hands that were disturbingly human-like, but with thick, dirty fingers tipped with black, curved claws. Its legs were the strangest part. They were bent backwards at the knee, like a dog's, but it stood perfectly balanced on two large, clawed feet. But the head. Its head was pure predatory nightmare. A long, graying muzzle filled with yellowed teeth, lips pulled back in a silent snarl. Its ears were tall and pointed, swiveling independently to catch every sound. And its eyes. They were the worst. They weren't animal eyes. They glowed with a faint reflected yellow in my flashlight beam, and they stared at me with a cold, calculating intelligence. There was malice in that gaze. It wasn't just a hungry predator. It hated me. It wanted me to be afraid. It took a step into the room, its claws scraping on the hardwood floor. It moved with a terrifying, fluid grace, a predator in its element. I raised the shotgun, the bead sight centered on its massive chest. "Get back," I yelled, the words sounding pathetic and small. It ignored me. It took another step, lowering its head slightly, like a wolf about to charge. That's when Duke did the bravest thing I have ever seen any living creature do. With a roar of fury, he launched himself from my side, a 70-pound missile of loyalty and courage. He hit the creature in the leg, sinking his teeth into its thigh. The creature let out a guttural roar of surprise and pain. It looked down at Duke, its expression one of annoyance rather than fear. With a movement so fast I barely saw it, one of its long arms swung down. It didn't swat him away, it grabbed him. Its powerful clawed hand closed around Duke's entire midsection. It lifted him into the air as if he weighed nothing. Duke yelped, a sharp, terrified sound, and then there was a sickening crunch of bone. The creature tossed my dog's broken body aside like a piece of trash. He hit the far wall and didn't move. Rage, pure and white-hot, washed over me, burning away the fear. It had killed my dog, my friend, my family. In that moment, I wasn't prey anymore. I was a Marine again. I fired the shotgun. The blast was deafening in the enclosed space. The buckshot hit it square in the chest from less than 15 feet. The impact was tremendous, staggering it backwards a step. It roared, a sound of agony and fury that shook the very foundations of the house. Dark, thick blood welled from a ragged hole in its chest, but it didn't fall. It didn't even seem that badly wounded. It just looked angry. I worked the pump, ejecting the spent shell and chambering another. Shuck, shuck. The creature glared at me, its intelligent eyes narrowing. It lunged. I fired again. This time I aimed for the head. It was too fast. It ducked, and the shot went high, tearing a hole in the plaster wall behind it. Before I could pump the gun again, it was on me. A clawed hand shot out and grabbed the barrel of the shotgun. Its strength was unbelievable. It twisted the gun from my hands as if it were a toy, the steel barrel bending with a screech of protesting metal. It threw the useless weapon across the room. I was disarmed. I was face to face with it. I could smell its breath, a rank odor of rot and raw meat. I scrambled backwards, tripping over my grandfather's coffee table. I fell hard, my head cracking against the floor. The creature stood over me, its massive form blocking out what little light came from the storm. It raised a clawed hand to strike.
This is it, I thought. This is how I die. But then it hesitated. It looked down at the bleeding wound in its chest, then back at me. It let out a low, frustrated growl. It had what it came for. It had proven it could get in. It had asserted its dominance. It had killed the dog. Maybe the fight was more than it bargained for. Maybe the shotgun blast had done more damage than I thought.
For whatever reason, it decided I wasn't worth the effort. It turned, and in 2 swift, silent strides, it was back at the window. It vaulted through the opening and disappeared into the rain and the night. I lay there on the floor for what felt like an hour, my body trembling uncontrollably. The only sounds were the storm and the dripping of rain through the broken window. Eventually, the adrenaline faded, replaced by a deep, aching grief. I crawled over to Duke. He was gone. His neck was broken. I put my head on his still warm fur and I wept. I wept for my dog, for my grandfather, for the loss of a world I thought I understood. I knew I couldn't stay. The creature was wounded, but it was still out there. It might come back. I had to get away. I stumbled through the house, grabbing my keys and my wallet. I didn't take anything else. I couldn't bear to look at the bent shotgun, at the blood on the floor. I ran out the front door into the storm, not even bothering to close it behind me. The run to my truck, parked 50 yards away by the barn, was the most terrifying experience of my life. Every shadow seemed to hold a hulking shape. Every gust of wind sounded like a growl. I expected a clawed hand to reach out of the darkness and grab me at any second. I fumbled with the keys, my hands slick with rain. I finally got the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed the lock. The engine turned over on the first try, a sound more beautiful than any symphony. I slammed the truck into gear and stomped on the gas, fishtailing in the mud. The headlights cut a frantic swath through the darkness, illuminating the rain-swept driveway. I didn't look back at the house, I just drove. The mile-long gravel road to the paved county highway felt like 100 miles. I expected it to step out in front of me at any moment, to end it right there. But it never came. When my tires hit the asphalt, I didn't slow down. I drove straight to the county sheriff's office, a 30-minute drive I made in 15. I burst through the doors, soaking wet, covered in mud, my knuckles bleeding from where I'd hit the floor. A sleepy-looking deputy at the front desk looked up, startled. I tried to tell him what happened. The words came out in a jumbled, panicked rush. The creature, the house, the dog, the shotgun. I probably sounded like a lunatic. He listened patiently, his expression a mixture of pity and disbelief. He got me a blanket and a cup of coffee that I couldn't drink. The sheriff came in about an hour later. He was an older man with a weary face who looked like he'd seen it all. I told him the story again, trying to be calm, trying to be factual. I told him about the deer, the tracks, the scratches on the house, the creature itself. He listened, nodding, not saying a word. When I finished, he just sat there for a long moment, stirring his own coffee. "Son," he said finally, his voice gentle, "you've been through a heck of an ordeal. Your granddaddy passing, being out there all alone. Sometimes grief and stress can play tricks on the mind." He suggested that a large black bear, maybe rabid, had broken into the house, and in the confusion and the storm, I'd imagined the rest. "It wasn't a bear," I said, my voice shaking with frustration. "I shot it. Twice. It stood on 2 legs. It had hands." He sighed. "We'll send a car out there at first light, check things out. I'm sure we'll find bear tracks all over the place." And that's what the official report said. Animal attack. They found the damage to the house, the shattered window. They found Duke's body. They found the deer carcass. The coroner's report for Duke said his injuries were consistent with a large predator, such as a black bear. They found my bent shotgun. They didn't find any unusual tracks. The torrential rain had washed everything away.
They didn't find any blood inside the house that wasn't mine or Duke's. It was like the creature had never been there. My story was dismissed as the ravings of a grieving, traumatized man, a cautionary tale about leaving city folk alone in the country. I was getting ready to leave the station, feeling utterly defeated and alone, when one of the older deputies stopped me in the hallway. He was a quiet man, close to retirement. He put a hand on my shoulder and leaned in close. "I believe you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "My granddaddy used to call them dog heads. Said they lived in the deep swamps. Been stories about 'em in this county for 100 years. He told me about a string of unsolved livestock killings from the 70s, animals torn apart just like the deer I found. He told me about 2 hikers who went missing in the national forest just north of my grandfather's land about 10 years back. They were never found.
"You did good to get out of there," he said, his eyes serious. "That thing, it knows you now. It knows your scent. Don't you ever go back there. You sell that land, you hear me? You let the woods have it." I took his advice. I hired an estate agent and sold the farm for a fraction of what it was worth. I never went back. I couldn't. The new owners, a young couple from out of state, were told that the damage to the house was from a severe storm and a bear. I've often wondered if they've ever heard the howl in the night or seen a tall shadow moving at the edge of the trees. That was 2 years ago. I live in a high-rise apartment in the middle of the city now. I can't stand the quiet. I can't stand the dark. I have 3 locks on my door. I still see its eyes in my nightmares, those intelligent, hateful, yellow eyes. I lost my dog, I lost my family home, and I lost my sense of safety in the world. I lost the naive belief that everything in this world can be measured and explained. I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a figment of my imagination. It was a monster, ancient and intelligent, living in the shadows of our world. People talk about the great, unexplored wildernesses of the world, but they forget that there are pockets of it right here in our own backyards. Places where the map just says woods, where the roads don't go. And in those places, things live. Things that have been there long before us and will be there long after we're gone. So, if you ever find yourself deep in the woods and the birds suddenly go silent, don't try to rationalize it. If you find tracks that don't make sense, don't explain them away. Turn around. Go back to your car. Lock your doors. Go back to the lights and the noise of the city and be grateful for them. Because there are things in the darkness that know you're there, and you are trespassing on their land, and they are not happy about it. Trust me, I know.